Welcome back to the Council of Elrond, guys. My name is Dave, and I'm joined as always by my better half. Wait, no, that sounds like we're a couple. My brother, Johnny, and we are here today to discuss the Barrow-Wights, what they are, where do they come from, and why they are probably the creepiest things in all of Tolkien's writings. So welcome, Johnny. How are you?
Welcome. Thank you for that welcome, Dave. I think Barry White is a great singer. I didn't know that he was actually a creep. Like, what are you telling me?
Barry White. Yeah. We'll get into it. Maybe there'll be a little section on him. Who knows? There isn't. I wanted to say that we've always wanted to bring this episode. Well, I know I've always wanted to bring a Barry White episode to you guys, but it seems especially topical now with the latest Rings of Power trailer that came out a little while ago. Eagle-eyed viewers have picked out what some might describe as accurate descriptions of wights. But don't worry, if you guys love or hate the Rings of Power, that is not what we're here today to talk about. So, anyways, what are the Barrow-Wights? The Barrow-Wights only feature in one chapter in The Lord of the Rings, and were actually omitted completely by Peter Jackson. But the film still featured a sword that came from the Hobbits' encounter with them, and it proves hugely important in the Return of the King. So, Johnny, before I get into any specific details, I know that you're reading The Fellowship of the Ring again for the millionth time, and
No, I'm not. I'm actually listening to it on audiobook for the first time.
Okay, cool, yeah.
I'm actually going to give a shout out to the version that I'm listening to, because I was about to listen to the Andy Serkis version, but I checked out this one. It's the Phil Dragash version, and
cool name.
The guy he uses Howard Shore's music in the background, lots of scenes. He's got loads of other unless he's got some amazing voice acting skills. It sounds like he's got loads of other people that do lots of the quotes as well. So sorry, just a little sidebar there, but yeah, go check it out it's free on Spotify.
No, that's great. Just like our podcast is the number one Lord of the Rings podcast. So check us out if you're not already listening, which I don't know how you'd get this message. Yeah, check us out on Spotify and check out Dragash. That sounds like a really cool Middle-earth type name. So yes, I wanted to say that before I get into the more specific details on these creatures, would you just be able to give our listeners and myself a little recount of what happened in the Fellowship of the Ring book when the hobbits leave the house of Tom Bombadil? And sorry, by the way, if anyone doesn't know who Tom Bombadil is, another shameless plug, please check out our episode titled Tom Bombadil, I believe, where you'll find out he's a crazy character that's only in the books, and you'll find out everything you need to know there. Sorry, Johnny, give us a little recount. Por favor.
So the hobbits are staying with Tom Bombadil. They say their goodbyes and they head off. And Tom actually lives right in the shadow of these Barrow Downs. The hobbits are always a bit like worried and scared, because they've known that there's rumors over for years and years that there are these wights that live in there. A wight, W-I-G-H-T, not W-H-I-T-E. A wight is like a phantom or a spirit or a ghost kind of thing. So if you want to try and compare this, it's going to be something very similar to a Nazgul, which is what we get in the film. They're going to be kind of similar, really spooky, really creepy, and they can put all sorts of spells and incantations on you, and they basically want to kill you.
They do. So yes, the hobbits leave the house of Tom. They head north towards the east road to Bree, and this skims the very edges of the Barrow Downs. And Tom actually warns the hobbits multiple times, saying, "Keep to the green grass. Don't you go a-meddling with old stone or cold wights, or prying in their houses, unless you be strong folk with hearts that never falter." And Tom, he also told them to keep to the west of the downs if they were to pass by them. By the way, we've mentioned this a few times now, but what are these downs? What are these Barrow Downs that we're referring to?
Kind of like just hills, I suppose. I don't know. I've always in my mind imagined them as kind of hills. Kind of almost like a fairy fort or a ring fort or something. I suppose a hill is the opposite of down. A hill goes up. So
not if you're coming off the hill, you're going down. These ups and downs. Actually, I never thought about that. Maybe that's why they called them downs, is because They're up and down. But yeah, in the context of this, in the context of Lord of the Rings, what are the
It's an
Barrow Downs to?
expanse of land,
Yeah.
basically, and it's just kind of like, for me, that's what it was. It's kind of like a maze, like a natural maze of Earth, where it could be like hills and valleys and troughs and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, but most importantly, it is a burial ground essentially.
Right.
It's like tombs
Left out that important information.
within, yeah, a burial ground within all these little areas of hills and whatnot. Tom Bombadil also teaches the hobbits a little song to get them out of any trouble if they were to encounter a wight. So the journey for the hobbits from Tom Bombadil's house, it actually starts off quite okay. But the sun was bloody hot that day and it was beating down. And hobbits, being hobbits, of course, they decide to have a little snack, little picnic on the side of the road. Well, sorry, there's no roads here. They have a picnic on the east side. And this snack, it turns into a bit of a nap. And when they wake up, of course, a mist has risen and the hobbits can't really see through. And this completely disorientates them and they lose their way a bit. They get totally separated. Frodo, scared and lost, doesn't really know what to do. He tries to hear where the others are. He's calling out to them and he yells out, "Where are you?" And he hears something like going on in the distance, like a faint kind of muffled cry. It might be one of the other hobbits. And then in a really chilling part in the chapter, Frodo yells out again, "Where are you?" To which a terrifying response says, "Here." And then a tall black shadow loomed up and almost a sound from the ground, it says in the book, says, "I am waiting for you." And it just sends shivers down to your very spine. Like, I don't know, I get creeped out. I think this is the scariest chapter in the book by far. And what happens next? Frodo, he kind of just falls to the floor, weak. He could see, and this is the description that we get in the book. This is the best description of the wights that we have. He could see two eyes, very cold though, lit with a pale light that seemed to come from some remote distance. Then a grip, stronger and colder than iron, seized him. The icy touch froze his bones, and he remembered no more.
Where could they be? Sam! Mary! Anyone! Where are you?
So yeah, that's what happened to Frodo. And then what happens next, Johnny? Like, does he die? Does he survive?
Just before I go into that, I want to go back to what you said a moment ago about how the hobbits were warm and had a little snack and that turned into a nap. There was already a little bit of weird, like mysterious things happening at that point. And because it says that they didn't really intend to have a nap, it was almost like they were already being put under some sort of an incantation. And they
didn't know. They just woke up, basically. It was almost like a spell.
They knew that they were in the area where the Downs were near, and they were worried about that. So they had a little snack, and they could see the area that they wanted to get to. And they were like, okay, we know that if we just keep walking for a few more hours, we'll get to that line of trees, and we'll be out, and we'll be in the clear, and it'll all be great. So that was their goal. They had no intention of stopping for a nap. But they did need to stop to have a quick bite, and they had that. And then suddenly all four of them were just passed out. So there was a bit of foul play already happening there. So just wanted to come back and I mentioned that as well. But so
it's similar to the dwarves in The Hobbit, actually, when they're going through. Is it
Mirkwood? Is it?
It's Mirkwood, yeah, Mirkwood, where they don't even intend to, but some of them fall asleep.
Yeah, it's the same kind of thing. Actually, that's a really good scene that's shot in The Hobbit. Where
Andy Serkis shot that scene.
Did he really?
Or directed it?
Wow. So you really get a sense of actual how the air can be heavy, and that's causing them like to be completely disorientated. And it's a really, really well shot scene. Actually, it kind of gives you an idea of how walking through a forest can be very unpleasant. So most of the time when I'm reading The Hobbit, I'm kind of going, these lads complained a lot, but I'd say it's a grand walk that they're out on there now. Anyway, sorry, I forgot your question. What was it?
Frodo gets grabbed by this wight, and what happens?
So then what happens is they all get put under a spell and they all get put to sleep. And then at some point, Frodo, probably without the intention of the wight, Frodo wakes up. And again, we're not really sure why it's Frodo that wakes up, but again, just Frodo in the book is, he's the dude, he's the main guy, he's the strongest and the best hobbit. So these kind of things, if one person is to wake up first, it's always going to be Frodo. Maybe also he has the ring, he has an extra like sort of ability and power with him, so that kind of helps him along. But he wakes up first, and he sees what's going on, and he sees that all the other hobbits are basically lying down on the ground. They're all asleep. They're all dressed in white. They've got rings on their fingers. They've got jewels all over them, and they all have one big sword is lying across the neck of all three hobbits. And that's another thing about Frodo. He's not dressed like this. He's not wearing white, and he doesn't have all this stuff all over him. So again, he's always just like this kind of elite outside member, where he's kind of just
main
standing.
character.
Yeah, like this is my story. You're in my house.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of the things to note as well, when Frodo woke up, there was just an overwhelming sense of dread upon him. That was like he couldn't really remember anything else, and he looked around. He could only see a pale green light, and he knew immediately that he was imprisoned in a barrow, which must have been terrifying after hearing all the stories of Tom. Yeah, just
not just from Tom, like from when they were kids, they knew about Barrow-Wights, and they were like just hearing a ghost story all your life, but being like, these are very specific ghosts that live there and don't do it. It's like, Simba going into the elephant graveyard and being like, oh crap, I've actually done the thing, and I'm a big idiot.
You said the elven graveyard, right?
I said the elephant graveyard.
Oh right, I thought you said the elven graveyard.
But that'd be cool, the elven graveyard.
That would be cool. Yeah. No such thing. Well, who knows? In the Rings of Power, they're all like trees that have the shape of like fallen elves. So that was quite cool. That was quite nice. But it's kind of weird, and it's incredible that Frodo builds up any courage at all, because in the book it describes that there's this pale light, and the light weirdly seems to be actually coming from Frodo and the floor. He couldn't really see anything else that's going on. Eventually more sight came to him, and he could see the other three hobbits. They were lying there on their backs with their arms on their chests, just as you described. Their eyes were closed, they looked deathly pale, and there was one single long sword going across their necks. I think when I first read the book, I just assumed that they all had individual swords, but this was one big long broadsword across their necks. You were right, they're all dressed in white. They're wearing rings and jewelry, and they're also surrounded by treasures, possibly gold, but all this treasure looked kind of cold and unappealing to Frodo anyways. And there was also individual shields by their feet and swords by their sides. Now, Frodo, he could hear a distant murmur, and it was kind of spooky, or it was like a spooky song dwindling in and out, and eventually he could actually make out some words. And after a while, the heartless and haunted murmur became clear to hear. It was an actual incantation. Now, Johnny, do you remember any of the lyrics to this incantation? And I'll give you a hint, or incantations, I should say. Gollum actually says a few of these lines in Peter Jackson's film. It's when he's by the Forbidden Pool, I think. And it's not the Rockin' Pool one.
So, my only wish to catch a fish so juicy.
Yeah, sorry. Wait, no, it's not. It's not when he's at the Forbidden Pool. I think it's when he's getting tortured by Faramir.
Is it when he's...
Oh, no, it's not.
Is it when he's... Is it when they're... before Frodo comes up to him and says his name is Smeagol, he says,
yes,
I do not know what lies ahead. Like that one. When
yes,
fallen and something is dead. And
that's
that scene.
That's the exact scene, but those aren't in the lyrics.
Yeah, I was just spitting out some lyrics that I kind of knew, because call me heart and what the hell?
So this is what Frodo can hear dwindling through the air. He hears, cold be hand and heart and bone, and cold be sleep under stone. Never more to wake on stony bed, never till the sun fails and the moon is dead. In the black wind the stars shall die, and still on gold here let them lie, till the dark Lord lifts his hand over dead sea and withered land. So some of that does sound familiar, because they're cold be hand and heart and bone. Never till the sun fails and the moon is dead.
I did recognize some of that. All right, but I wouldn't have been able to quote it. It's a bit like...
No.
Yeah. It's a bit mumbly when he's talking, and like Frodo's like Frodo's asking him all these questions. He's just ignored him, and he's just spouting off this like rhyme as an answer. He's like, "You weren't so different from us, were you?" And he's like, he's like Smeagol. He's like, oh.
Never to sunfazer, Buddhist. Yeah. It's just another really good example of where Peter Jackson leaves out a whole chapter of a book, but still manages to kind of pay homage to it.
Yeah.
Cold be heart and hand and bone, and cold be travellers far from home. They do not see what lies ahead when sun has failed and moon is dead.
What happens now? Frodo is chilled to his bones, but he manages to work up the courage to recount the song, or the songs, was the one song that Tom Bombadil had taught them. So Frodo, he was silent afterwards and could hear nothing but his own heartbeat. Then, bursting through the door, comes good old Tom, rescuing the hobbits, and has complete power over the Wight. So, there you have a little summary of that chapter, them getting captured by these Barrow-Wights. Really,
Are you going
really
to
freaky.
talk about what Tom does then immediately afterwards?
I'm not. The podcast does not end here now.
No, I'm just going to say that what they extract and extrapolate from these the Barrow-Wights' little den, that the Tom goes back in and he kind of looks at all the treasure and he's like, "Oh lads, check all this shit out. Some class stuff out
exactly.
here." And he goes in and finds. Does he find a brooch for Goldberry?
He does. He finds a brooch that belonged to a woman who'd been long dead, but Tom actually knew who this woman was. There's no mention of who the woman was, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But before we talk about what else,
I thought he just says, like, he just looks at a beautiful brooch and kind of goes, "This belonged to a woman, a fair beauty," or something like that. But I think he was just assuming that because it was a beautiful brooch. But maybe maybe he knew.
No, I saw different people talking about it. A lot of people believe that it was a woman that he wished he remembered, but
I mean, Tom knows everything, that he's been around since before the
Exactly.
trees and the rivers. So, I mean, yeah, he probably met her.
I think he does know who this woman is that owned the brooch, but he wanted to keep the memory of her and gift it to Goldberry. That was my understanding from.
I've always just thought that he just looked at a beautiful brooch, and like back then, in those times, like as in, imagine a couple of 100 years ago, if you saw a beautiful piece of jewelry or like a crown or like, a tiara or something, you'd be like, "This belonged to a beautiful princess." You're just saying beautiful because that her status would have probably been a princess, and so therefore she would have been able to at least have a bath every now and again, and that would be like levels of beauty unknown to the most common people. Like, so I don't know, I kind of just took it as that kind of an idea of like probably belongs to some beauty, maybe an elf or something like that.
Well, I mean, there is a podcast out there that breaks down every single page of the Lord of the Rings. I know Stephen Colbert has mentioned it before that he's listening to this, so I'm sure they'll get into it and break it down. But
Thank you, Tom.
The spell on this barrow lies broken, and no wight shall ever come back to it. I've scattered the barrow's treasures. They're free to all finders. Old Tom has taken a pretty toy for his lady.
I want to get back to the meat and bones of...
There is no meat on those bones, maybe.
I want to get back into the meat and bones of where are these Barrow Downs located. And also, we mentioned earlier that they're burial grounds, but like, to whom? Johnny, I'll put it out to you.
Wait, sorry, I'm doing a terrible job interrupting, but I'm going to interrupt one more time because I forgot to mention one other thing that happens when Frodo wakes up, which is there's a hand just crawling around.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this like, it describes it as a creeping hand or something like that, and it's like its fingers were creeping towards like the other hobbits or something, and Frodo has to pick up a sword that's lying there, and he just like swipes at this hand and he breaks the hand off the wrist. And I mean, it doesn't really go into much more detail than that, but it just, my idea, or in my head, I think of like the thing from the Addams Family, that it's just this like a hand just crawling around on its own, like not even attached to a body, but maybe there is a body there, I don't know. But he breaks it off at the wrist, and that's also a very creepy visual.
It's a creepy visual, and yeah, there's tons of artwork out there of this visual, and it always seems like the hand is so long and it doesn't seem to be attached to anything because it's always coming around a corner.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
Frodo's there like about to swipe at the arm. But and I think it's very good that he does this, because who knows what would have happened if he didn't swipe at the arm and Tom Bombadil arrived when he did, but it might have been too late.
Yeah, but again, it's cool that scene where Frodo is just like, he wakes up, he like he breaks the hand off by the wrist with the sword, and then he like sings the song to Tom Bombadil, and then like the whole thing is they're safe. But it's very creepy. Sorry, you need to repeat your original question again.
No, so moving on just to these actual Barrow Downs themselves.
Yes.
What were they for? They were burial grounds. Who were they for, and where exactly were they located?
They were located in the Old Forest.
Near the Old Forest, I will say. This area has no trees whatsoever.
Yeah, but I think when you like, I think it was almost like the central point of the Old Forest, where like, there's just they come to this massive clearing, and they're kind of relieved initially to find this clearing because they've been like really having a crap time trying to get through the Old Forest, because it's kind of like we spoke about that scene of the dwarves going through Mirkwood. They're having the same kind of experience, and I think it's like just at the moment when they're about to like say, let's just turn back and go home because they're really struggling. They find this clearing and they come out, and then that's where they get in towards the Barrow Downs, and that's when they find Tom Bombadil's house. So I always thought it was like in a central location because again, they kind of, well, I don't know, maybe it's actually on the opposite side of the Old Forest.
No, it is. It's not in the middle of the forest. It's right. It's on the east side of the forest.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So it is when they come out of the forest altogether.
Right. Okay. Because I remember they got to a clearing, but I thought that clearing was just kind of like the eye of the storm kind of thing.
The area was in between. It was east of the Old Forest, in between the Shire and Bree. So it was basically a place like we described. Low hills, little small ups and downs, and absolutely no trees. And atop these little hills were burial mounds that were placed there by some of the earliest humans in the First Age. Who was initially buried there is a bit of a forgotten mystery, but that wasn't the only... Well, it was the only use that they were for, but they had been used again later in the Second Age. So there's a little history of these burial grounds. So at the end of the Second Age and the beginning of the Third Age, Elendil, who we all know,
and love,
Elendil and his kin founded the kingdom of Arnor, and in its borders were the Barrow Downs. As the Barrow Downs were built by the Arnorian ancestors, the Arnorians themselves started a tradition of burying their own lords and kings there too. Oh, by the way, it's probably worth mentioning at this point that the Barrows weren't scary or ghoulish in any way. They were just like regular burial grounds. So we'll get into why they became...
Did they have any wheels?
Wheelbarrows?
Yeah.
Were you just trying to think of trying to shoehorn a wheelbarrow joke in there? Getting back to it. Arnor becomes split. So the kingdom of Arnor eventually becomes split into 3 kingdoms. And these kingdoms are called Arthedain, Rudar, and Cardolan. Cardolan is exactly where the Barrows were. So that's like the southern region of all these kingdoms.
Right.
About 600 years later, the Witch King invades Cardolan and defeats the men there. So this is about 50 years into the Angmar Wars, which is probably a topic that we'll look into in a future episode.
And it's important for this one as well.
It's a very important one. But basically, to summarize the Angmar Wars, it was between the northern Dunedain kingdoms of Arnor, mainly Arthedain, and the forces of Angmar led by the Witch King. So Angmar is like an evil kingdom. Now, back to Cardolan. Cardolan was defeated by the Witch King, but the survivors still lived there for a couple of hundred years or so. But after this came the Great Plague. COVID-19 swept through the lands of the northern kingdoms, killing many. And it's actually unknown if the Witch King had a part to play in this plague. A lot of people believe that Sauron was actually behind the plague itself. But anyways, if he was or he wasn't, the Witch King did capitalize by sending spirits to the Barrowlands to prevent that land being used as a refuge. Because the Barrows were like really... Like this area was actually very, very fertile. It was good for farming, but yeah, that's where people would regroup if they could. So this was the reason that the Witch King sent all these evil spirits. Those spirits are known as the Wights. And contrary to some people's belief, the Wights are nothing to do with the kings and lords that died many years before and were buried there. But they're actually evil spirits that reside in their graves. And for some reason, these spirits were intertwined with the land almost like parasites are to
Their host.
exactly. And yeah, so they just kind of remained in this area and they were just kind of forgotten about, I suppose, by the Witch King. When they weren't needed anymore, they just kind of stayed to the land and like dwelt there.
So they're kind of like, it's like a poltergeist that kind of has to kind of stay in a location, like in the house or something, or
It's kind of like I think they were initially posted there to like stop anyone going there, and then it just kind of became their home and they wouldn't leave, and they don't have any thoughts really to themselves. They just kind of dwindled in these lands.
and they were just like playing dress up with the old dead kings, like jewels and robes and stuff.
Well, that's the thing, like it's described as they basically reanimate the bones. Well, like what exactly are these wights, Johnny? Who, like, what are these evil spirits?
like
Where do they come from?
Spirits that were summoned by the Witch King, and
Yes, but like, were they summoned from? Can you summon them out your arse, or do you have to summon them from somewhere else?
yeah, it's a good point. I suppose a spirit is probably something that has to have an origin, and maybe they were originally evil men. Maybe they were these. You said that they weren't related to these like old kings of men, so we shouldn't think of it that way. So that's what I would have thought that they were, because I kind of always sort of lumped them in with their backstory being similar to the Nazgul and be like, oh, they're probably just old, important kings of men who the Witch King, like basically what Sauron did to the Nazgul. Then the Witch King was like, I'm going to do my own little experimentation and see what's going on here.
Yeah, pretty much. Like that is the important thing to remember, that there is a separation. Like these were bones and dead kings from Cardlin long time ago, and even before that there was like older bones from the First Age. But it was actually the Witch King and Angmar sending down evil spirits from there to reanimate these bones, and they basically just like took these lovely bones of like lovely kings and lords, and like they had all their jewelry on. They just like haunted these Barrow Downs, which is
Class.
a spooky image. But yeah, you mentioned there like they could be the spirits of evil men or something. It's not 100% known where these spirits originally came from. Some say that they are evil men. They could be corrupted Maiar, or the spirits of fallen orcs, or even Avari elves. So these would be the dark elves. But the description that I gave earlier, that Frodo basically describes the wight as, is the most notable description that we're given. But there are a few other quotes in the Adventures of Tom Bombadil and poems that Tolkien had written before he had even started any of the the Hobbit book or the Lord of the Rings. They're a lot less descriptive, but like it is interesting to think that before Tolkien had even thought about this incredible journey of a ring or the Hobbit story, he was already thinking about Tom Bombadil and these wights. There's actually a cool little part in the Adventures of Tom Bombadil, this book, where Tom actually encounters a wight in his home, but he sends it away using his rhyming incantation. So Tom's like, we're not here to talk about Tom Bombadil, but it is cool how he has ultimate power over these wights. He could just send them away with a song.
Tom is the master. Yeah, he's not just of the wights. He just has absolute control and absolute dominance over everything, basically in his area that he lives in. But as we said, go check out the Tom Bombadil podcast and then come back to this one.
Oh, Tom Bombadil, oh, by water, wood and hill, by the reed and willow, by fire, sun and moon. Hearken now and hear us, come Tom Bombadil, for our need is near us.
Why was the barrow that the hobbits awoken, why was it covered in gold, shields, swords, jewelry, and other treasures? Or like, why would you think that?
Well, I suppose like the way kings of old would want to be buried with some of their treasures, or some of their, a king would definitely want to be buried with his sword, and probably Egyptian pharaohs, they definitely were famous for getting buried with like huge, vast amounts of treasure. Maybe because they're in some cases, certain religions, certain beliefs, they think, oh, I need this money to pay for my way into the afterlife, or just to sustain me in the afterlife. So there's lots of different beliefs like that we can take from the real world, where people want to be buried with money, like Troy, for example, where people are getting burned. They burn the bodies and they put the coins on the eyes so they can pay for the doorman or something, or the boat.
Yes.
But they have to pay someone to get into Valhalla or
The
wherever they're
afterlife.
going, you know. So there's loads of different.
Yes, into the Viking afterlife.
Exactly. That's where Brad Pitt wanted to go, Dave. Historians would love me. I have no idea, but that's probably something more or less.
No, the reason I asked you this question is because obviously Tolkien can write amazing fantasy, but a lot of his stuff is based on mythology, Norse mythology, but a lot of it is centered around real history. And yeah, you're absolutely correct. If some of these barrows are for high lords, some of them might be for kings. Now, the interesting thing about this particular wight that captured the hobbits, he seemed to bring them to the most important barrow of them all. In the book, it mentions that when Merry was asleep during the capture, he actually dreamed that he was the last prince of Cardolan, and he was being under attack by the men of Carn Dûm. Carn Dûm is the capital of Angmar, so that is probably where the Witch King had his throne and he was living. And in this dream, he also felt that his heart was pierced by a spear. And it's commonly thought amongst Tolkien fans that Merry actually relived the last moments of this prince's life, which is so cool to think about.
Not
But
really,
yeah.
because if the last moment was your heart being pierced by a spear, that's the only part he got to relive.
No, I don't mean that it's cool for Merry. I just think that the idea of this...
I'm only joking. It is very cool.
It's class. Like, so when Tom Bombadil arrived, as previously mentioned, there was all this treasure, including a brooch from a woman. But yeah, that's probably the reason is that they were in the last prince of Cardolan's tomb. So maybe the bones that were trying to reach for Frodo was actually the last prince.
Ooh.
We just mentioned that wight, but do you know any other famous wights that might have been around the Barrow Downs?
Barry?
yeah. We've got Barry the Wight, who's known for his skills of singing. Can you think of any others?
We've got Walter White.
Walter the White, he was at first a good man, but eventually fell to the corruption of evil.
Do you have any more?
I do. I have a few more. Do you want to hear them?
Let me see if there's any I can get off the top of my head. Betty?
This is, in fact, the oldest wight of them all. Yes, Betty.
I can't think of any more whites.
So we've got the last Prince of Cardolan. We've got the few we mentioned. We have Snow the White, who was once put under a dark sleep by evil forces. But when she awoke, she found a friendship with the dwarves. We also have Jack the White, who once led an army of 7 nations to war. We have White Christmas, who of course is the twin of the famous Lloyd Christmas. And finally, now this is a big deviation from the films, but Peter Jackson changed it completely. We have Gandalf the White, when he, spoiler alert, turned into a white in the books.
All right. All right. Very good.
I wanted to know if there was actually any other whites that had names like, do you know the way the Nazgul, we've got Kamul the Nazgul, and
yeah, he's the only named one really.
Yeah, but like there are thoughts of where the others came from. I thought it'd be cool if we knew where some of these spears came from. So I had to come up with them myself.
Very good.
If anyone else could come up with any other whites, I'd love to know.
White. Jack the White, I like it. Yeah, he led his 7 nation army.
One thing I wanted to ask you as well, Johnny, the whites. First of all, why don't they take the ring, and who do the whites answer to, or like where does their allegiance lie? Like, why didn't they take the ring off Frodo when they captured him?
That is a good question. I've always believed that they had their allegiance to the Witch King. I'm assuming they wouldn't feel the power of the ring in the same way that a Nazgul would, because they're totally different beings. Maybe they weren't even aware of what this thing was. I think that if you are some sort of an evil spirit, though, you should be able to sense that there's some power from this. As we've said, it's the most powerful, most evil artifact that exists. So, yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. As I said earlier, I believe Frodo woke up before the others, and he wasn't even wearing white yet or something. So maybe they had left him to last to change and to, I don't know, to like take all of his belongings or rifle to them, and maybe they just hadn't got to that point and he woke up earlier than they expected. So maybe that's the reason. I don't know.
Well, yeah, you said it and you were correct. They originally where they had allegiance to the Witch King, but after several hundred years, they just kind of became bound to the land that they inhabited. They almost seem as if part of the Witch King's plan for war long ago, but they've been left forgotten and uncommanded. So they're nowhere near as powerful as...
Sure.
Well, they're not really that powerful at all, but they don't have a mind. They're just basically a memory and a haunt.
Yeah, I'd say the Witch King, well, maybe he forgot about them, but I think he might just like wanted just to leave them there just to kind of keep a sort of an evil presence around that part of the world.
He definitely didn't forget them, because the Witch King actually, when the Witch King and the Nazgul were searching out for the hobbits, he actually roused the Barrow-Wights, and that's kind of what made them more powerful at this time. When the hobbits were going through the land, he roused them to try and, like, you know, maybe
keep a lookout, lads,
to capture them.
And then they did capture them, and then they let them go.
The thing is, the hobbits were caught, but the Whites didn't even alert the Nazgul. They didn't tell the Witch King. They just tried to recreate the look of the previous inhabitants of the graves, and they were looks like they were going to sacrifice them. So perhaps to eventually have 4 fresh skeletons to reanimate themselves, you know, maybe they're just looking for... By the way, there's no answer to this. We have a very, very small part of a small chapter in a book that we're trying to like figure out what's going on. It looks like they didn't care to tell the Nazgul. They were roused by the Witch King, but all they know is like, we have been lingering around these bones. We want to reanimate new bones.
They're looking for entertainment, so
they're just trying to carry out like the tasks that they've been doing for like hundreds of years. So it's more so just powered by the memory of the bones around them as well, rather than the Witch King himself.
Feast on his flesh.
So I thought that was kind of cool. Like it's interesting how the Witch King has command over these spirits and creatures, but at the same time, they don't really have any allegiance to anyone. They're just kind of going about doing their own thing.
What do you think of my point that I just made up on the spot as well, as the fact that because Frodo was the only one that wasn't dressed in the same way, maybe they just hadn't got to him at that point. And he was like, maybe they were saving him for last or something, because they were like, this guy's a bit older. He looks like the boss. We leave him for last. And then they just literally hadn't got to him to search him and to see what his possessions were. So maybe, again, there's a bit of luck involved, or something that's not quite luck. That's maybe a higher power was involved there as well. That could be a reason.
I absolutely believe that. I do believe that luck or higher powers were involved, and Frodo was the last one to be searched, and he was, I don't know, he was the oldest and had the most willpower to wake up first, which was important. But yeah, I think maybe they were being searched, but I don't know if they necessarily would have been searching for the ring.
Sure.
They were just, you know, slowly undressing and redressing.
Old people always wake up before young people. You know, when you wake up.
Frodo just had to go to the bathroom.
Yeah. Your grandmother's like, I've been up for 7 hours. And you're like, oh, right, okay, sorry.
Finally, we get on to the part that we've all been dying to hear. Fair enough, Peter Jackson left out the Barrow-Wights, and the films still went pretty smoothly, I think we can all agree. But what is the one very impactful piece to the story of Return of the King that's kind of glossed over?
Merry's involvement in killing the Witch King, and the dagger specifically that he uses to stab the Witch King. That is what you're going to talk to us about now, where he got this dagger from.
Yes. So one of the changes is that it was not Aragorn that laid out the individual blades for the hobbits, but it was actually, again, Tom Bombadil. It describes in the book that they were of incredible craftsmanship, long leaf-shaped and made of strange glimmering metal. The blades seemed untouched by time, unrusted and still sharp. Tom told the hobbits that the blades were forged long, long ago by the men of Westerness to combat the King of Angmar, but unfortunately the men of Westerness were defeated at Carn Dûm, which again is the capital of Angmar. So I just wanted to read out a passage here that describes the effect of the sword after Merry used it to stab the Witch King. And behold, there lay his weapon, but the blade was smoking like a dry branch that has been thrust in a fire. And as he watched it, it writhed and withered and was consumed. So passed the sword of the Barrow Downs, work of Westerness, but glad would he have been to know its fate, who wrought it slowly long ago in the North Kingdom, when the Dunedain were young. And chief among their foes was the dread realm of Angmar and its sorcerer king. No other blade, not though mightier hands had wielded it, would have dealt that foe a wound so bitter, cleaving the undead flesh, breaking the spell that knit his unseen sinews to his will. So for anyone that doesn't know, this stab from Mary into the back of the knee of the Witch King is incredibly important because it actually it describes how it breaks a spell that knit his unseen sinews to his will, which sounds pretty cool. So it breaks a lot of the Witch King's power. And
yeah, we see in the movie, we see Mary stab the Witch King, all right, and then we see kind of he injures his own hand from the stab, and I think we see the blade smoking and stuff, but we don't really get an explanation. And like for me, definitely when I first saw that, I just thought it was a normal blade, but if you stab the Witch King, your blade is just going to like smoke and disintegrate. But I didn't really think about it because obviously if you use a normal blade on the Witch King, it would just have zero effect. It wouldn't, it wouldn't be able to hurt him at all. But this is probably the only blade that was able to do that. And I think another thing that happened was it also cut his connection to Sauron. And that was another important factor as well.
Yeah, and just the fact that the blades, when they're given by Aragorn, they just look like letter openers rather than the way they're described in the book as being like, leaf shaped and glimmering, untouched by time. I think that's actually, I think that's one thing that they could have done differently, because it wouldn't have taken a lot of time from the movie. Maybe Aragorn gives them some random blades at first, but maybe like in a later scene, even like in Rivendell or...
I was going to say in Rivendell, they could get them from Galadriel, I suppose.
And she could just describe them as like, here are some blades from like old warriors of Westerness or something like that. Just even a passing remark like that. And then you would remember like this blade is important. I don't know why, but it is.
Yeah.
But
that's a good point.
it's a interesting change that Peter Jackson made, but it's cool nonetheless.
Yeah, I think we've said it before that it's kind of interesting. You never really think about it at the moment, but when Aragorn first is like, right, here's 4 small hobbit-sized blades that I'm just carrying around for no reason at all. Take these, and now I'm going to go off searching for some food, and just, there you go. And you kind of just go, that's completely normal for this random guy to be just carrying around exactly the right number of swords, and they're all like hobbit-sized or whatever. So we kind of really don't think about... Now, again, another thing that could have happened off camera was he went scouting out somewhere and he found a little village and he bought 4 little blades for the hobbits while he was there. But I mean, I don't think so. I think there was no villages from Bree to Rivendell. So that definitely didn't happen.
Aragorn encountered the Wights and he woke up, defeated them, and Tom Bombadil came and then he stole all these blades.
Or maybe he picked them up in Bree before they set out and he was like, okay, I'll give these to the lads when the time is right, just before the scene with the Nazgul.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, actually, anyways, I remember there's another part that when Tom Bombadil gives them those blades, isn't that like the first moment that any of the hobbits like even consider battle? I think they're all accepting these blades off Tom Bombadil, and he's kind of going, oh, it's a handy thing to have a blade out in the real big world or whatever. And it's kind of like this is the first moment that any of the hobbits have even considered being in any sort of a kerfuffle, any sort of like a little struggle or whatever, and they kind of just go, oh, I never even thought that needing a weapon wouldn't even be on my horizon. Like, so
that's actually very true. I would never have thought about that. Like, you would just, from watching the movie so many times and reading the books, you'd think, well, of course they're going to come into some encounter, but imagine
trolls and whatever, and they were just like oblivious. They were like, we're just going for a big walk. Big hike.
Yeah, exactly. Like, could you imagine you and me, like someone's like, right, this thing, it's like this, I don't know, this jewel, it's kind of important. We need to get it out of here. So we're going to like walk over to France. And it's like, okay, that's fine. That's all I know. And then someone halfway through hands you like an AK-47. It's like, this, you might need this. Just hold on to it in case. You'd be like, what? What's happening now? I thought we're just walking to France.
Yeah, there's going to be some ghouly ghouls and some monsters along the way. It's like, what? Oh, God.
These are for you. Keep them close. I'm going to have a look around.
They were forged long ago by the men of Westerness across the sea in ancient Númenor. They cast spells on their blades for the bane of the Dark Lord. Their kings of Numenor are forgotten now, but their sons wander in loneliness, guarding simple folk from wicked things.
So anyways, the Barrow Downs, that's what the Barrow Downs and the Barrow-Wights were, but where did Tolkien get his inspiration? So I suppose you and I were from Ireland, and standing stones and burial grounds are actually very common for both of our countries, and they were extreme. And banshees, yeah, which are similar to wights as well, in a way. These were extremely common in the areas that Tolkien frequented in England. And yeah, for our American listeners and Canadian listeners and who else, England, Ireland, and the rest of Europe, I suppose, is pouring with history. So it's not like, every little piece of history has a cafe set up next to it. Like, I know even next to me and Johnny's house, there's a fairy ring. And there's not even a sign to say it's there. It's just a mound that probably was once a castle or something. And yeah,
and it's now haunted.
It's now haunted. But yeah, Tolkien would have gathered all these inspirations and probably learned about the lore and the history of this kind of stuff. And that's definitely where his inspiration came from. But of course,
yeah,
Tolkien has no allegory, or he doesn't believe in allegory.
No, but inspiration and allegory don't have to be the same thing, So I mean,
that's true.
I was reminded of another episode that we did actually a long time ago, which was talking about the jack-o'-lanterns.
Yes, yeah. The Dead Marshes.
In the Dead Marshes, exactly. That's another one. Go check that out as well, guys. The Dead Marshes episode, really, really good one as well. And we speak about the inspiration for seeing those lights out in the distance, where Smeagol says, don't follow the lights, and if you fall down into the water, you'll go down to join the dead, and you'll put up little lights of your own and stuff. So there's some cool, again, inspiration taken from real folklore and real kind of stories that would have been passed down over the years, and things that people would have believed, and about spirits. And I think it's from, if off the top of my head, it's from when you're in certain areas with pools of water, that the water has stagnated and it's releasing these weird chemicals. They can, from a distance, look like little mini flames or little mini fires, but it's actually just kind of the water is spitting up some chemicals, and it is like a natural phenomenon, but it can be observed from a distance looking like these little flames hovering above the water. And that's obviously what people, before they had any idea of science, they kind of going, oh, that's some spirit in the hovering over the water that's out there and wants to kill me.
And the reason why it became so synonymous with being evil and haunted is because then people would try and go after these things, or follow the lights, as Gollum would tell you not to. And they're in bogland, marshland, and it's extremely dangerous. So they would end up dead, and people would blame it on these evil spirits or jack-o'-lanterns.
Yeah, that's right. There you go. So again,
but even though we kind of summarized it all there, go check out the episode. There's a lot more in there.
We did not summarize that. We did that very badly, but that was fine. More or less. Yeah, it's just pique your interest and go check it out.
Yes. So now, Johnny, that we have a little bit more of an idea of what Barrow-Wights are, or I should stop calling them Barrow-Wights, just wights in general. What did you think of? We have a breakdown episode of the Rings of Power, but from the trailer, there seems to be some sort of undead creatures. Do you think we'll see wights? Or
that'd be so exciting. It'd be so exciting. Because we definitely did. I think we did our breakdown episode, and then we omitted that part. I can't even remember if we spoke about that or not. It was a while ago. So, but maybe we saw it afterwards, because I think more eagle-eyed viewers, spent a bit more time, just watching everything.
We reacted on the day. I think that news kind of came out like the next day, and I was like, crap.
Yeah, or else, it was from the behind the scenes video, which I think we already just mentioned kind of very briefly at the end of our other breakdown. So, but I saw some more still images of it, I think, the next day, and at first I saw a couple of people just mention it, like, oh, there could be Barrow-Wights, but the more I looked at the image, I was like, that definitely looks like it is a Barrow-Wight, because I was like, what else could it be? It's too early for Nazguls to be appearing in this story, because obviously, what are the Nazguls? They get given the 9 rings. We haven't even seen anything to do with the 9 rings. We saw, obviously, in season 1, we saw the 3 Elven rings being forged. It looks like we're going to see in season 2 the 7 Dwarven rings being forged. I imagine season by season we're going to see a different group of rings. Maybe the 9 will be in season 3 or something like that. But it definitely would be too early for the rings to be forged in season 2, handed out to all the kings of men, for them to fall to the power of these rings and then become Nazgul, and then for them to appear. So I think that'd be way too. I mean, we know that there's time compression happening as well, but I think that'll be way too fast for that to happen. So hopefully we do just get this like brief little encounter with a Barrow-Wight. I think you and I actually also speculated before that they could be. It looked kind of like the King of the Dead, but again, I think that's because he had a similar appearance. He was wearing kind of royal kind of clothes as well. But that also fits into this perfect description of what a Wight would be wearing as well. If they do kind of reanimate the bones of these ancient dead kings, or that's very exciting. Also, in the image of behind the scenes, we saw that he had green on his hand, and again, that would be very typical to do for green screen, and so they could be using that as maybe they're going to project onto his hand. I don't know, maybe it's going to be glowing, maybe he's going to be wearing some rings. Well, I mean, if it's a practical thing like rings or whatever, I'm sure they would have just done that with practical effects. So there'll probably be some sort of a glow,
or just a ghoulish kind of fake hand, that
sure.
kind of way.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm very excited. Like if that's a possibility, then awesome. I'm definitely for Rings of Power using stuff again. That's something from the trilogy of books that they have the rights to. So there'd be absolutely no problem with them using that. And I think also we've said this as well before, that they are saying that season 2 of this series is going to be darker, grittier. So I'm all for that.
Probably spookier as well.
Please bring it on. Please make this, more adult, more gritty, more a few jump scares wouldn't go amiss. Yeah, I'm all for it.
Yes, I'm also all for it too. But the one thing that can't be done, the reason I said, what do we think about the scene with the Barrow-Wights? But I meant to say the Wights, because it can't be the Barrow-Wights, because that all happens way later. Because like I mentioned in the little brief history lesson there, it was Elendil when he has to leave the sinking Numenor. Spoiler alert. He sets up the kingdom of Arnor, and then from there, that's when the Witch King sends the spirits down and they reanimate the bones. But like, who's to say? Like, Tolkien doesn't express that Wights are only around the Barrow Downs exclusively. So there's definitely wiggle room. Another thing as well, I just wanted to mention, because like we're obviously going to see Sauron come into his own, and please come into Anatar, but like, we're going to see Sauron properly in season 2, where it was all mystery box in season 1. An interesting thing to note is Sauron is described and disguises himself as the necromancer. But Tolkien doesn't really explore this part of Sauron's skill set at all, really, other than just mentioning it, especially in The Hobbit, which was actually written in 1937, and it never mentions the name Sauron at all. It just says the necromancer and the Dark
but that's
Lord.
Of course, because Tolkien didn't know who Sauron was when he wrote The Hobbit. He just came up with the idea of the necromancer, and then he upgraded that necromancer to Sauron as he came up with the ideas for writing the Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah, but what I mean is, that's still canon. It's still in the Hobbit book. He didn't change it to Sauron. Like, it's still the necromancer. But we don't really see any times that Sauron is performing any necromancy. Is that a word? So yeah, like
something about neck romance. That's all I know.
It's just when you're softly kissing your lover's neck.
Yeah, you're like, well, let's get into a bit of neck romance.
So like, this could be a really cool thing for Rings of Power to do. They could like start this whole thing of like Anatar, Sauron, and the necromancer, and actually show why he was called the necromancer, because they would have rights to that name as well, but it's just a word, so they could just say he was a necromancer.
Well, a necromancer is not something that's not created by Tolkien either. Like, that's
no, of course not. Yeah,
like a common word that would have been used for someone who is like a witch, or somebody who was able to do magic.
Well, it's for necromancy would be raising the dead. So
yes, that's correct.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Like, we don't see Sauron ever like raise spirits from the dead or anything like that. So I think actually having Wights, not Barrow-Wights, but Wights, would be pretty cool if it was Sauron himself that, like, I don't know, raised them from the dead. That could be, I don't know, I think that could be kind of cool.
Very cool. Very cool. I'm excited.
There aren't any other mentions of Wights in Middle-earth apart from this little chapter that we have, and also, the Adventures of Tom Bombadil and a little bit in Unfinished Tales and whatnot, but I don't believe that this was the only time that either Sauron or the Witch King decided to send evil spirits to haunt an area for whatever reason. So yes, I think there's plenty of wiggle room to play with. But that is all that we know about the Barrow-Wights and Barrow Downs, other than endless speculations and, you know, people's theories and hypotheses,
Reddit forums
online.
I feel like I know more about these spooky, ghoulish devils now, and I like them all the more.
Back you devils! So yes, that's a wrap on the Wights. Thank you all so much for listening to this episode. It was a blast to do, as they all are. I would love it, especially if you guys could leave a review on Spotify or Apple or whatever you listen to these podcasts on, and help us grow this little pod. As always, you can send us a message on Twitter or X or Instagram. It's at melon_heads on Twitter. And it's Melonheads Official on Instagram. We do try to respond to everyone that we can there. But yes, we will see you next week, guys.
See you later, guys.